I was doing a literature review recently and I saw a paper with this title: MIVNDN Ultra Short Term Wind Power Prediction Method with MSDBO ICEEMDAN VMD Nonce DC Transformer Net. This is an example of an overly complicated and confusing title. There are 6 abbreviations in total here, and even though I work in this field, I don't know these abbreviations, so I cannot really understand what this research is about. Hi everyone, my name is Andrei, I'm researcher at Imperial College London. When I saw this paper, I thought that I should make a video about writing titles for research papers. You see, it is difficult to formulate a good title, but it is very easy to write a bad one, a confusing title that readers will not understand, and they won't even continue reading the manuscript. So today I want to talk about the problem of writing good titles for research papers. I will show you a few examples of real titles today, then we will discuss the principles that you may want to follow, and finally my goal is to analyze the roots of this problem. Why do many authors create lengthy, difficult-to-read titles for their papers? And the main reason is that many researchers try to show everything in the few lines of a title. I mean, probably they're working on complex models with multiple methods, assumptions, etc., and they want to show all these components, all these elements in one title. Unfortunately, this leads to overly complex titles that no one really wants to read. We discussed in the previous video about beautiful figures that sometimes authors create overly complex diagrams to visualize their approach. And we considered a few examples of figures with dozens of blocks, multiple interconnections, labels, etc. And even though such diagrams may be clear to authors, they are very confusing to the general public, to readers. And the same happens with titles. Long, confusing titles with many abbreviations are not clear to readers, and therefore readers may not want to continue reading the manuscript, and we want to avoid this. You see, there is no single rule of how to write a great title for your paper. There exist a few principles that you may want to follow, but if necessary, you may also violate those principles, and you may actually write a great title without following any principles. This is why I call this topic the art of writing titles for research papers. It is the art because it requires creativity and experiments. So now I want to show you a few examples of paper titles and discuss a few principles that you may want to follow. Let's begin with the red flags, the things to avoid in paper titles. And the first red flag I want to discuss today are abbreviations and acronyms. Please avoid them in the titles. If you want to use one abbreviation in your title, maybe this is acceptable, but please talk to your co-authors and discuss if this abbreviation is absolutely necessary for this paper. Maybe there is a way to avoid it. If you are using 2 or more abbreviations and acronyms in your title, there is a very high chance that you are doing something wrong. And again, it is your responsibility to make sure that all researchers in your field know these abbreviations and they will understand the meaning of your paper. And yeah, there is a high chance that you're doing something wrong and maybe you should formulate your title in a different way. So please be very cautious if you're using 2 or more abbreviations in the title. Why do we want to avoid abbreviations in titles? Well, basically because they make your title difficult to understand and therefore readers will not even want to continue reading the manuscript. I know this sounds like an obvious thing, but anyway, I see many recently published papers with abbreviations in titles. And not only this, I have been talking to some students and I realized that many students are not aware of the danger of using abbreviations in titles. Some students believe that using abbreviations is fine because this allows them to pack more information into the few lines of a title. And my goal today is to show you why this is wrong. So let's come back to the paper that I showed at the beginning of this video. The reason I selected this paper is because it has 6 abbreviations in the title, which is really difficult to understand. It took me some time to analyze these abbreviations, and you can see what I highlighted in the abstract, that MSDBO stands for Multi-Strategy Optimization Algorithm. Then we have another abbreviation, very lengthy one. I think this is one of the longest abbreviations I've ever seen, ICEMDAN, which stands for Improved Complete Ensemble Empirical Mode Decomposition with Adaptive Noise Method. Really a long abbreviation. And this is not the last one. We also have VMD, Variational Model Decomposition, Transformer, etc. And this creates a lot of confusion. By the way, as I highlighted here in red, we can see that in the title, the authors say that they use nonce DC transformer. But then in the abstract, they call it just nonce transformer. I mean, maybe DC is not explained here because it's an obvious thing, but I don't really know what it means. But note that this is not the end of the story, because we have another abbreviation at the beginning of the title, MIVNDN. And to understand what this means, I had to go to page 5 of this paper. Let me show you this. Yes, here on page 5, the authors say that based on the above problems, this paper proposes this method called MIVNDN. So, as you can see, this abbreviation is abbreviation of other abbreviations, which creates double complexity for readers to understand the message of this paper. And yeah, let me say that we shouldn't put such a heavy burden on readers when writing research papers. Of course, you can use some abbreviations in your titles if those abbreviations are very well known in your field. For example, if you work in genetics, you can use DNA in your title, no problem. In my field, energy, many authors use CO2 emissions in the title, and they don't have to explain this abbreviation in the title because everyone knows what this means. But if you are using a very complex niche method, please don't use its abbreviation in the title. The next red flag, the next thing to avoid, is long titles. But what is a long title? Well, in my field, electrical engineering, a good title is supposed to occupy 2 lines. So you can imagine structure of your paper. You have 2 lines of the title, then names of authors, abstract, and anything else. So it is considered that a good, concise title should fit these first 2 lines. If you're using 3 lines, if your title occupies 3 lines, sometimes this is acceptable. But if your title occupies 4 or more lines, this is not really acceptable, and your paper may be rejected in journals, and also readers and reviewers would not appreciate this. So please don't use more than 2 or maximum 3 lines of the title. Why do we want to avoid long titles? Well, similar to abbreviations, long titles reduce the impact of your paper because readers may think that it is not relevant to their field. Look, if you use many components, many terms to explain your problem, some readers may think that you are working on a very niche problem and therefore they would not be interested in reading the paper. I discussed this problem of long titles with some senior academics, and I loved this quote: "The more details you provide in the title of your paper, the fewer people will be interested in reading it." And I think this is a great quote, really explaining the problem of long titles. If you put a lot of information in your title, you can do this, but sorry, fewer people will be interested in reading it. Let me show you a few examples of lengthy titles that I've recently seen published in my field. And please note that I don't want just to show you a long title and say, look, it is long. No, my goal is to explain why this happens, why authors decide to make lengthy titles, and then we can talk about what to do to make titles shorter. So let's check this first paper. This paper was published in 2024, and you can see it has quite a lengthy title. Let's try to understand why it is so long and why the authors decided to include so many terms in the title. So let's try to read it. The title goes as Analytic Neural Network Gaussian Process Enabled Chance-Constrained Voltage Regulation for Active Distribution Systems with Photovoltaics, Batteries, and EVs, electric vehicles. So yeah, indeed, it has many, many words. Now let's try to understand what this title really means. And the first thing I want you to pay attention to is that these first 10 words, even though they are different words, they serve as adjectives. So they are descriptive, they are describing something. For example, check this word enabled. Everything that goes prior to enabled simply means that this enables something. For example, machine learning enabled method. This means that machine learning enables us to do this method. So we can say that these first words are simply describing something. What are they describing? Well, we can see that the main part of this title is this, voltage regulation. Let's highlight it in green. So the authors are studying voltage regulation, and there are many features of their approach, and therefore this is such a lengthy title because the authors try to list all these features before naming the method. But we have many more words. Let's highlight them again here, and we can say that these words list applications. Voltage regulation for active systems with something and then with something and something else. And now I hope you can appreciate this example and you can understand why we have such a lengthy title. The main thing is voltage regulation, but the title is very long because authors try to pack in all information about this research. First, they describe different features of this regulation, and then after, different applications of this regulation. And if improving this title and making it shorter, we need to understand what is the main message here, the main component of this research, and then we simply need to remove all other words from this title. Now let me show you one more example. Here is a paper published in 2022. It is actually quite relevant to my field, but as you can see, the title is really long. In total, there are 24 words in this title. And again, let's try to analyze what is happening here and why the authors decided to make title lengthy. Let's try to read it. So the title says, Multi-energy coordinated and flexible operation optimization and revenue allocation models for integrated microenergy system considering seasonal and daily load characteristics of different buildings. Yeah, indeed, it is a very long title. It's difficult to read it. Let's try to analyze what is the main part here. And when I scan the title, I can see that the main thing here is this. Let's highlight in green. Revenue allocation models. So the authors are analyzing revenue allocation models. But again, you can see that this is a huge title with not 3 words, but 24 words. And this happens for the same reason. The authors wanted to include all components of their research in one title. That's why prior to the revenue allocation models, we have some descriptive words like multi-energy coordinated and flexible optimization and something else. And on the right, we have applications, that these models are for integrated energy systems and this and that, considering this and that. Again, if we want to make this title shorter, we need to be more focused on a single contribution of this paper, and we should not list all features and all modeling assumptions and applications here. Now let's discuss what to do when writing titles for research papers. As I mentioned, there is no silver bullet here. Your paper may have different titles that would fit it. There is no single optimal solution, but there are a few good practices that you may want to follow. And today I want to share with you my favorite 3 practices that I often use in my research papers. The first approach that I want to share with you today is to show the main message. Go straight to the point. I mean, in your paper, you are probably developing something, some new approach or model or method, or maybe you're analyzing new results. Why not to say this explicitly in the title? Your title can be very short. It can be as short as just a few words. You can say, for example, problem X, review of recent challenges. Or you can say, new method X for problem Y. That's it, 5 words and you describe what you're doing. I know that this practice doesn't always work. For some papers, short titles may seem strange, boring or deceptive. But sometimes very short titles work perfectly well. And actually, I want to show you a few examples where the titles are as short as 2 words. And I think this is just a great example of how you can make your title extremely concise when you are developing something new. So let's check these examples. First, I want to show you this paper published in 2008 with the title Isolation Forest. Just 2 words. Why is this paper called Isolation Forest? Well, if we read the abstract, the authors say that they propose a fundamentally different method that explicitly isolates anomalies. And then they say that this method, iForest, does this. So we can understand that the method is called iForest, and therefore the paper is also called Isolation Forest. It is very straightforward, very concise title for the paper. And since the method is truly new, the paper can be called like that. And by the way, this paper has been cited over 7,000 times because the method itself is useful and the paper is written in an effective manner. Now let me show you another example, this time not from machine learning and data science, but from game theory. And the title of this paper is By-Form Games. Again, just 2 words. Why is the paper called like that? Well, in the abstract we can see that the authors say, we propose a hybrid, non-cooperative, cooperative game model, which we call a by-form game. So the authors proposed a new model, by-form game, and therefore the paper is titled By-Form Games. It's very simple, very straightforward, but also very effective. And this paper has been cited over 400 times, which is not a lot, but for the game theoretic study, this is really a considerable number. Another idea that I want to share with you today is to start with a question. Starting with a question is sometimes a great way of formulating the title of your paper. This usually applies to some novel studies that are challenging existing methods, existing visions, or they are proposing some new insights, etc. But actually, questions in titles can be used in many more cases in a broader context. And I've seen many papers that effectively used questions to formulate the message, the idea of the paper. And I want to show you a few examples of this. But first, let me tell you that I would classify questions into 2 categories. The first category of titles uses questions to set the problem, to describe the problem. And then there is a second part following the question, which is used to clarify or address this problem. So basically, the advantage of using questions in titles is that it gives you this flexibility to create like 2 parts of your title, question and then some clarification or answer. And this is really great. It works really well for some titles. And here I want to show you an example of my paper. Here is my journal paper published in 2019 in the Energy Economics Journal, and I think that I used the question title really effectively here. So let's read it. The title says, "Can cross-border transmission expansion lead to fair and stable cooperation? Question mark. Northeast Asia case analysis." So you can see that in this case, I used the question to describe the problem. I'm telling the readers that I'm studying cross-border transmission expansion, and also I will study fairness and stability. And then in the second part of the title, I say Northeast Asia case. This implies that yes, we are addressing this problem, and specifically we will analyze the case of Northeast Asia. You can see that by using a question title, I described my problem really well, gave some additional details, and still my title is quite short. It occupies less than 2 lines. There is also a category of question titles where you use the question not to set the problem, but to make some provocative statement, a joke or a metaphor. And for some papers, this approach works really well. So let me show you another example here. Here is a recent manuscript that has a question in the title. And the first part sounds like this. How long is long enough? I mean, when we read it, we understand nothing about the paper. Is this a joke? Is this some philosophical question? We don't know. It means nothing. But then, when we keep reading the paper, we can see the title, Finite Horizon Approximation of Energy Storage Scheduling Problems. And now we realize that the topic of this paper is scheduling problems, maybe some optimization problems for energy, and these problems have horizon, and we understand that the authors are probably talking about the length of this horizon. And now we have this moment where we say, aha, that's what they mean by this question. That's really smart. Yes, maybe this is a funny title, a funny question, but also it is very creative and it may be effective for your paper. Then the last practice I want to share with you is to start with an action. Look, you are doing something in your paper. Maybe you are analyzing data, maybe you are improving methods or assessing the impact of something. Why not to say this directly at the beginning of your title? Why not to use this action, this verb, to indicate what you are doing, so it will be easy for readers to understand what to expect from the manuscript. And here I want to show you a few examples of my papers where this approach, starting with an action, worked really well. Here is my journal paper published in 2022, and the title starts with this, Enhancing the Stability of Coalitions. So we are telling the readers at the beginning that we are improving the stability of coalitions, and therefore we are showing with this action what to expect from the manuscript. And then if readers continue reading it, they will see that indeed we are analyzing this problem of stability of coalitions and we are trying to improve it. So very straightforward, very easy to read and honest title for this paper. And here is my recent manuscript. It is not published yet, but again, check how I start with an action. I'm saying quantifying phase unbalance and coordination impacts. Maybe I could have rephrased it saying quantifying the impacts of. But anyway, my message here is that we're quantifying, we're analyzing the impact of something. So I would say this is a great way of formulating your title when you start with an action and when you tell readers what you are doing in this paper. One thing I want to mention is please don't overhype your paper in the title. Don't create clickbait titles like people do on YouTube. Remember that you are doing research, and even if you develop a fancy title, you still should be humble. If you promise something in your title, this should be delivered in the paper in full volume. Don't exaggerate your results and the impact of your paper. The goal of this video is to help students and young researchers to create better titles for papers, but I don't want to turn academia into a clickbait competition for the coolest and best title. Now, where can you get inspiration for great titles? I would recommend you monitoring best journals in your field. And today, as an example, I will show Nature, which is a very famous, highly impactful journal. And they have a very challenging review process. Whenever editors don't like the clarity of a manuscript, starting from the title, they reject it straight away. This means that the published works usually have high level of clarity and their titles are very effective, so we can learn from them. I know that there are some controversies about publishing in Nature, but anyway, it's a famous journal, so let's just take a look at their approach regarding titles. And the first thing I want to show you is the Nature's formatting guide. I will leave the link in the description so you can read it, but let's go to the section about titles. Let me read this. Titles do not exceed 2 lines in print. This equates to 75 characters, including spaces. Titles do not normally include numbers, acronyms, abbreviations, or punctuation. They should include sufficient detail for indexing purposes, but be general enough for readers outside the field to appreciate what the paper is about. I believe this is a great summary of what we have just discussed. First, they say that the title should be short, no more than 2 lines. Then they ask to avoid acronyms and abbreviations, and finally discuss some other details to include in the title. I also want to show you this Nature Index article, How to Write a Good Research Paper Title. And I love this quote here, unread science is lost science, which is true. If no one reads your paper, then your piece of science is lost. There are many useful things discussed in this article. For example, at the beginning, they mention that there is an influx of publication today and that researchers struggle to attract attention to their work, which is true. We know that there is a crisis with papers nowadays in academia. And then there are several principles that they discuss. Again, I don't think we should read these together. I just want to mention that good title avoids technical language. This relates to our discussion of abbreviations, that we should not use a lot of technical jargon, abbreviations and acronyms. Then a good title is easily searchable. Good title is substantiated, supported by data. And finally, I like this point, a good title sparks curiosity. And here there is a quote from one editor-in-chief who says that good title should spark interest of a person searching in a split second. And indeed, this is true. When we are doing a literature review, when we are searching for new papers, we have like seconds to read each title. And if we don't like the title in a split second, if we don't make this decision, if there is no curiosity, we simply don't click on the title and we don't read the paper. So overall, this is a great article and I recommend you to check it out. And here I want to show you how you can monitor recent papers published in journals. I work in power systems, so Nature Energy is the most relevant nature journal to my field. And here I opened this page, Nature Energy recent articles. And we can see that almost every day new article, new paper appears in this journal. And we can scroll and see the titles and the figures from these papers. And in this manner, you can analyze how authors are titling their research. The first thing we can notice here is that many papers don't have long titles. For example, this one, Dynamic Cycling Enhances Battery Lifetime. Only 5 words, but we can understand the meaning of this research. And we can see the variety of techniques that I discussed today applied in this journal. For example, this paper says that they do techno-economic assessment of something. This paper, refocusing on effectiveness over expansion, the action. I can actually show you many papers that have action at the beginning of the title. For example, here, exploring the cost and emission impacts. So we know that they're analyzing the impacts. Reducing the cost. So we know that they propose something to reduce the cost. So by monitoring relevant journals, you can see examples of great effective titles, and you can save these examples that inspire you. Now, the last thing I want to show you today is why we need short, concise titles. And specifically, I want to show you how I am checking recent publications in my field and how I'm getting notifications from Google Scholar. You see, I get several emails from Google Scholar every day, these publications alerts, and obviously I don't have time to read all of them. So I have to quickly scan and identify the most relevant papers. And usually the first thing I'm looking at is the length of the title. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Here you can see my email box and a folder with Google Scholar alerts. You can see that indeed I get new emails almost every day. So I got 4 emails today in the morning, I got 4 emails yesterday, 4 emails 2 days ago, etc. So every day I get new notifications about new papers published in my field. Now let's open one of the emails, let's say this one, and you can see here the collection of relevant, recently published papers. And in total, one email has more than 10 papers. So I don't have time to analyze all of these. What I do, I'm quickly scanning the titles, names of the authors and the abstracts, trying to understand if this is relevant to my field, if I like the title, if I know the authors, if I know the journal, etc. And what I found is that sometimes titles are so long that I can't even see them. For example, check this title. You see these 3 dots here? This means that the title, the original title, is so lengthy that Google Scholar cannot even show it entirely. And if we click on this paper, we can see the journal's website, and indeed the full title of this paper has 20-something words. It's quite lengthy. So you can imagine millions and millions of researchers like me checking new publications every day, doing literature review, and then they see publications with very long titles that they cannot even see here in Google Scholar. So there is a high chance that researchers will not click on such papers, and then the paper will not make impact and will not get citations. It will not be read. This is the problem that I want to highlight in this video, that we should make very focused, concise, short, effective titles so that people can quickly understand if this is relevant to their field or not. Because no researcher has time to read all publications and all notifications that we are receiving nowadays. And let me say that this is not only my approach for literature monitoring. I've discussed this with some of my colleagues, and they told me that they do the same thing. They don't read papers with long titles. I believe that there is an extra benefit of developing catchy, effective titles. It helps you to think about your research and your problem high level and out of the box. It forces you to ask yourself many questions like, what is the most integral part of this research? How novel the findings are. Should we put the findings on the front, or should we highlight the methodology instead? And by developing an effective and short title, you try to think constantly about the main part of your research. What is novel and what should you report in the title? Because when you realize that you don't have 3 lines with 20 words for the title, but instead you have only 2 lines and let's say 10 words, you put yourself in this framework where you need to select the most important components only. You need to use only the main words for your title. And this actually helps the whole research. This helps you to think about future research directions, about this paper, second paper, about the whole thing you want to do in this study, etc. So I think that it's really effective when you work on titles, when you when you are engaged in this creative thinking. All right, we have now discussed the art of writing titles for research papers. We discussed a few principles that you may want to follow and a few things to avoid. Anything else is up to you. You can experiment a lot. You can test dozens of titles for your paper, discuss them with your co-authors and see which one works the best. I hope this video will be useful for your research and will help you to improve titles of papers. I would appreciate it if you can share your favorite paper titles in the comments so we can discuss what you like about them. See you soon. Bye.